To quote, one of our elders, Antipua Kanahele, a highly esteemed cultural elder, she says, "We are the land, and the land is us. We come from the land."
Hamadakyapi, Nick Tilsen Amachapi, Chantea Washtena Pechuzapalo, Tabloka Wakita Amachapi. My name's Nick Tilsen. I'm your host for the LANDBACK for the People podcast. My Lakota name is Tabloka Wakita, Looking Buffalo Bull. That name was given to me by my Honka parents, Charlotte Black Elk and Gerald Clifford, as well as my biological parents, Joanne Tall, Janice, and Mark Tilsen. I come to this podcast as your host, as a multi-generational organizer. My great-grandparents were organizers in the labor movement. My ancestors came from the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and this podcast is coming, at you right on from the Cheisapa, one of the longest places of resistance in the United States. The Osheti Shakoi and the Lakota people have been resisting the United States government in the stealing of our lands for hundreds of years now. And now with the growing LANDBACK movement, we now have this podcast to be able to share stories from the front lines of what Indigenous people are doing all across in the Indigenous world to fight not only for their land, but to fight for their liberation. In this week's episode, I'm going to have the great honor to be able to talk about what is happening with the LANDBACK movement in the Kingdom of Hawaii. And the struggle, the history of the land stealing and the theft of the land from the Kanaka people in Hawaii, and what the United States government did to colonize those lands, to institute decision-making structures, to try to destroy a people. And the story of the Kanaka in Hawaii is so consistent with how Indigenous people have been colonized globally around the world. And in that struggle for not only survival, but in that struggle for liberation, we have created bonds, we have built relationships, and we're rebuilding these relationships that have been laid before us. And so in this episode, we're going to take a dive into the history of Hawaii, the Kingdom of Hawaii, the history of the resistance movement in Hawaii, the sovereignty movement and the liberation movement of the people of Hawaii, and what's happening right now. There's LANDBACK struggles happening right now all throughout the Indigenous world, and they're happening in Hawaii too. And we're going to be able to dive into some of that, dive into why the Kanaka have embraced LANDBACK so much. Hawaii has some of the highest concentration of billionaires than almost anywhere in the world. The rich from all around the world in modern times continue to colonize the islands of Hawaii. And at the expense of the ecosystem, at the expense of the economic system, the traditional economic system, at the expense of the people of Hawaii. It's also one of the most militarized spaces on the face of the earth. And it has been a military tactical point for the United States government. And we have seen not only has the militarized state happening in Hawaii used to oppress and push down the people of Hawaii, it has been used as a point to continue colonization throughout the world and imperialism. And it's being used as a tool. And those are stolen Indigenous lands. And there's movements to historically to stop militarization, to fight militarization, to also stop and fight how militarization is polluting the waters, how it is destroying ecosystems, cultural systems. So we're going to get into a lot. This is a podcast that is not put together by journalists. We are not journalists covering the LANDBACK movement. We are people in the LANDBACK movement doing this work every day, every single day. And it's an honor to be able to do this work. It's a responsibility to be able to do this work. So this podcast, we will continue to bring stories. We will continue to bring a wide variety of voices from throughout the Indigenous world who are speaking truth to power, who are rebuilding Indigenous food systems, who are rebuilding Indigenous economic systems, who are revitalizing our Indigenous languages and building people power so that we can continue to work towards the liberation of Indigenous people. And this podcast is dedicated to bringing these stories to light. This podcast is about the people and it's about the land. And we don't sugarcoat things on this podcast. You're going to hear directly from those of us who are doing this work what we really feel about the work that we're doing, the sacrifices that we've had to make, and our continued commitment for Mother Earth in a time in history where the survival of human beings on this earth depends on our ability to mobilize around fighting climate change. And there is no fighting climate change without Indigenous leadership. And so we will dive into this. So it's an honor to be here. And I have two amazing guests that have come all the way from Hawaii to be here. And at this time, I'm going to give André, Perez, and Camille, Kalama the ability to introduce yourselves.
Aloha mai kako. My name is André Perez. I'm from Koloa, Kauai. Currently reside on Oahu in the Ahupua'a of Waiawa. And really happy to be here. And mahalo, Nick, for hosting us on your podcast.
Aloha mai. I'm Camille, Kalama. My ohana comes from Maui, but has been on Oahu for several generations. And we live in Waiawa. And I've been a native rights attorney for almost 2 decades.
Welcome to the show. Just to jump into it a little bit, we'll get into the meat of talking about some of our relationships and some of the work that we've done. But just for the listeners out there and the folks watching, could we share a little, brief history, 2 to 3 minute history about Hawaii, and how did the current landscape come to be? And I think a lot of times people hear Kingdom of Hawaii. What does that mean? Did they have a kingdom at what time? Do they still have a kingdom today?
I mean, it starts with, even before the notion of European Western government, just want to point out that Kanaka, Hawaiian people discovered Hawaii through Polynesian voyaging, and that we've existed on the islands of Hawaii, for 2,000 plus years. And that's important to set the foundation that we were able to sustain a balance between humans living on the land and the health of the land in a way that was sustainable for hundreds of years. But in modern times, I think an important starting point is approximately 50 years after contact with Captain Cook, who showed up in Hawaii in 1778, and at that point introduced a disease. And then for about 50 years, we existed with interactions with Europeans through whaling and through ship commerce and trade. And in 1843, after 50 years of contact, our ruling chiefs, in this case, Kauikeauli Kamehameha III, the son of Kamehameha the Great, who united the islands. Kamehameha III had the foresight to recognize that a big wave was coming, and that big wave was, in a way, prophesized by one of the very first Hawaiian scholars named David Malo. And he prophesied that a big wave is coming, and that in that wave there's big fish, and they're going to come and eat up all the little fish. And so they knew that European colonization, European way of life, capitalism, their forms of government were coming. And so Kamehameha III had the foresight to petition the leading countries around the world globally at that time for recognition. And so he sends out two emissaries, and they travel around the world petitioning the old European countries, England, France,
the U.S.,
Switzerland, the old European guard, so to speak. And they travel around the world. One Hawaiian named Timothy Ha'alilio and a Haole named Richards. And they travel around the world seeking recognition for the Kingdom of Hawaii. And in 1843, they succeed in securing nation-state recognition from the global powers at that time. And Hawaii then is seen as the first non-European country admitted into the international family of nations. And so we're the first brownies, so to speak, that are recognized as full equal status, nation-state status as any of the other countries. Full recognition, full status. So we had, the diplomacy and treaties, and then we existed from 1843 as an independent nation-state till 1893, and achieving what many scholars consider the most literate country on the planet by the 1880s. Literacy was really important to Hawaiians. And so there's a lot of writing that goes on. There's over 100 Hawaiian language newspapers, and that captures a lot of really important, it captures a lot of information through these Hawaiian language newspapers, during that time from the 1830s maybe till the 1920s or so. But there's a lot of Hawaiian language resources that capture the politics, the social impacts and development, what's happening, from the time that the first missionaries show up in 1820 and then securing nation-state status in 1843, and then moving forward to the overthrow by the United States in 1893. And so we exist as a nation-state, and then in 1893, the Kingdom of Hawaii, or the Hawaiian Kingdom, has treaties, and one of them is with the United States, and it's a protectorate treaty.
So, Camille, what happened in 1893? André gave us a great history leading up to recognition, to have an indigenous nation be recognized and have that amount of sovereignty. And then we go into 1893. What happened in Hawaiian history at that point?
I just wanted to correct. It was Timoteo Ha'alilio, not Timothy.
Sorry, I misspoke. Shooting from the hip here, off the cuff.
And one thing I wanted to bring up that was, as of 1893, we had almost 200 public schools run by the kingdom in Hawaiian language. And that comes up later. So in 1893, I believe the Spanish-American War was happening in the Pacific. There was a power grab, trying to grab territories. And American businessmen in Hawaii were vying for power. And they actually imprisoned our queen at the time, Queen Liliuokalani, in her own palace. And she yielded her authority not to those who were taking her over. She yielded her authority to the U.S. federal government until such time as an investigation was done, until a correction was made, because she did not want to put her people in harm. And so that's really key, because we refer back to that, to the point where she said she never ceded our territories. She said, I'm yielding until it's corrected. And so there was a period of time after that where there was an investigation and there was a report. And the report back under President Grover Cleveland said, yes, this was illegal. We shouldn't have done that, and it should have been corrected. But instead, what happens is President McKinley comes into power, and he doesn't honor that, and commissions another report. And instead of returning the kingdom, in 1898, the U.S. government attempts to pass a treaty to annex Hawaii. But they can't get the 2/3 vote required of the Senate to do so. And so instead of a treaty, they attempt to pass a resolution annexing Hawaii. And so one of our law scholars, professors, Williamson Chang, did some research on the congressional discussions at the time. And what some of them were saying was, well, if we annex Hawaii by resolution, I mean, why not? We could annex the whole world this way. Basically, it's just a resolution. But they passed it anyway. And that resolution took on a myth of its own, that there is this treaty of annexation. And we have a statue of President McKinley holding this so-called treaty, which was not a treaty at all. And so fast forward, in 1959, Hawaii becomes a state of the Union. And at the time, the choice of the citizens in what had become the territory of Hawaii was to remain a territory or become a state. And so for many of the folks that I talked to, including one of our important Hawaii Supreme Court justices, for them to remain a territory was to be a second-class citizen. And so in order to enjoy powers of voting, other benefits, the choice for them was territory or state, and they chose state. And that gets used against us, to say, well, this was your choice to become part of the United States. But there was no real choice.
It's like the classic story of, economic and political hostage that they've done to Indigenous people around the world. They call it a choice. When the reality is it's political and economic hostage. And
they set the options of the choices. And one thing that's interesting also during that time of the statehood vote is, there's through Hawaiian scholarship, and this is a lot of information to unpack in a short amount of time, but we're going to do our best to cover the story. We're talking like 150 years maybe. And apologies if there's little inaccuracies, but, we're having an off-the-cuff discussion. But what's important, too, is that, modern scholarship is showing now that, or has been showing for some time, that a lot of Hawaiians didn't participate in that vote for statehood. And in fact, military personnel that were stationed in Hawaii at that time, 1959, were allowed to vote. And that's unheard of. Like they're not residents of Hawaii. The military personnel usually vote in their own resident state. And so they were allowed to vote and, of course, skewed the numbers greatly towards statehood.
Yeah. And two things I think are important to bring up, too, is that during that time of annexation, when the U.S. was contemplating that, the citizens of Hawaii, of the kingdom, got together and started these petitions. And in the end, a huge percentage, like vast majority of Hawaiian citizens, Hawaiian subjects, petitioned against annexation. And those petitions were uncovered only recently in the past, few decades. And then, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And the last part was that in 1993, there was an apology resolution. So again, that resolution comes up, resolution to annex Hawaii, a resolution apologizing to the Hawaiian people for the taking of our land and our government and our kingdom. And that recognized our remaining existing claims to these lands, which include 1.2 million acres of unceded national lands of the kingdom.
And just to kind of tie it together, so you had President Grover Cleveland, who was U.S. president at the time of the overthrow, and he acknowledged that the United States committed an act of war against a feeble and friendly country, and that it was in the U.S.'s best interests and in integrity to restore sovereignty to the kingdom. But President Grover Cleveland, his term ends. But he's on the congressional record telling the U.S. Congress, as the United States president, we committed an act of war. And then on the back end, in 1993, what Camille's referring to was the apology bill issued by President Clinton. And Clinton is apologizing.
The resolution, yeah.
Apology resolution where he apologizes to the Hawaiian people for the overthrow and for America's role in the overthrow. And in that apology resolution, it acknowledges that Hawaiians have never acquiesced or their claims over their national lands. So you got two resolutions on each end where two presidents.
So in 1993, when that apology resolution, resolutioned the Hawaiians to death over there, how was that received? Like, what was at the time in 1993 when Clinton made that apology? Was it backed up by action? Did it change anything? How was it received by your people?
So at the time, it was a really momentous year. It was 100 years after the overthrow, so 1993. And there was huge gatherings of our people. And there was, I think, hope that there would be change. But in fact, there was no real action taken to do any kind of reparations. And when I studied some of the restorative justice principles, sometimes when you make an apology and there's nothing that follows, it can actually have a worse effect than if you never did it at all. And that seems to have been what happened with us.
So they coupled it with the 100-year anniversary of the overthrow, and that kind of was almost like a strategic move because it's commemorating the 100-year anniversary, and many Hawaiian people felt that it was progress, and many people celebrated the acknowledgement of the apology resolution, and there was a big march and a lot of commemoration. But the reality is, there's been nothing in terms of, as Camille said, reparations, restitution, anything to rectify the damage that has been done to Hawaiians and to our land.
I think the main value is that it woke up our consciousness. For myself, I was in 9th grade that year, and we hadn't been taught our history, not like our kids are now. And so that was a real awakening of what's going on here and how did this happen? How can it continue to happen?
Yeah, so the 1993, did that mark like a point when there was starting to be more revitalization in languages, in schools, or was that happening before this apology?
It's definitely happening before. So I mentioned there was over almost 200 public schools in Hawaiian language. Well, in 1896, using any other language, including Hawaiian, as a teaching medium was outlawed. You could only teach in English. And that was not overturned until 1986, when parents and families started teaching language on the beach and having preschools on the beach. And that was a result of direct action to get that law overturned. So it had been happening, but really since the 70s.
Good day, relatives. The Collective Abundance Fund from NDN Collective supports Indigenous individuals and families redefine wealth on our terms. Awarded grantees will receive cash awards of $25,000 or $50,000. Open to Indigenous peoples 18 years or older who reside in Minnesota, North Dakota, or South Dakota. The Collective Abundance Grant application period is open May 9th and closes July 11th. Register and apply early by visiting grants.ndncollective.org.
So all this background has helped us understand the political history of the Kingdom of Hawaii, the people of Hawaii. But what does this mean? Like, what's happening in Hawaii? What's the impact of these historical events on the people there? What is the Hawaiian experience that people experience today as the grassroots people in Hawaii? What's their life like there?
Probably, I mean, I would say not the best quality of life for our people. Land dispossession has, been the big thing over the past, 130 years or so. And land dispossession has sort of snowballed into many, many social issues. So as many Hawaiians say, we're priced out of paradise. A lot of Hawaiians living in places like Vegas, Alaska, California. There's a joke in Hawaii referred to Vegas as the 9th island, since there's so many Hawaiians living there. And that's the reality, in a nutshell, that it's very difficult to afford to live in Hawaii for Hawaiians. And we represent, the most homelessness in our own homeland.
It's so similar to what you see right here. You got right here in Mini Luzaha, in Rapid City, South Dakota, who this town is literally named after what our people called this area. Mini Luzaha, Swiftwater, Rapid City, But 92% of the unsheltered relatives out here are Lakotas. And to see that, it's a theme that you see like throughout
Everywhere.
the indigenous world.
Everywhere.
They take our land and then where our people are ended up, unsheltered. And then they're treated less than.
Yep.
I seen when I was in Hawaii years and years ago, driving along this, beautiful road going up the North Shore to on Oahu, and then I seen these camps of people living.
Blue tarp camps.
Yeah, the blue tarp. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, on one hand, the climate is friendly towards homelessness because it's warm, not cold, and we're island ecosystem and there's shoreline resources, so it makes it a little more comfortable to be houseless. But the reality is, that also brings in a lot of other houseless folks. Wasichu. There's a lot of white people who come to Hawaii because they think, well, if I'm going to be homeless, I'd rather be homeless in Hawaii. But
Because of the climate.
Because of the climate. But in the Hawaiian context, our people, most Hawaiians don't want to leave Hawaii. That's home, and our ancestral connection to the land, our culture, the social connections to one another. So, many Hawaiians will be forced onto the beaches, and with the blue tarps, we call the blue tarp, the blue tarp flag, as a metaphor for the homelessness and the homeless camps. But there's no question that, the majority of homelessness in Hawaii is Hawaiians, Kanaka.
So you for the listeners out there, I mean, this is, this is something that you see throughout the indigenous world in different ways and different places, and but I wanted to lean into that there's also powerful movement history. There's powerful revolutionaries, organizers, and activists that come from Hawaii who help pave a way for sovereignty for the Hawaiian people. And there's also a history that dates all the way back to the 1960s and 70s of the relationship between the Hawaiian liberation and sovereignty movements and the history of the American Indian movement and some of the struggles happening here. Could you share a little bit about some of those historical references and also what we're doing to build upon those relationships too?
Well, really, we can kind of look towards the 1970, around that time period. There's like the Great Awakening. Hawaiians are becoming aware of injustice and aware of our political history. And so an important part for me, at least in my studies and my mentorship, starts with Kokua Hawaii, which was a organization of grassroots Hawaiians who were organizing for a better life and for justice for our people. I think it was in 1971 that some Hawaiians went to a Black Panther conference and came back militant, politicized, and they start to organize. They were already organizing. And that kind of, Kokua Hawaii really tackling one of the first issues, Kalama Valley, which was a place, a valley where there was all farmers, and it was becoming gentrified, and the farmers were being pushed out. Long, complex story there, but it was a story of grassroots farming struggle against development. And that became part of the Great Awakening too. And Kokua Hawaii, out of them comes the new generation of organizers and activists that become like our foundational mentors. People like Soli Neheo, Terry Keko'olani during that time, Peggy Ha'o Ross in the early 70s. These are elders who were organizing, and one of the important ones in relationship to Indian country would be Gail Kawaipuna Prijin and Dr. Kekuni Blaisdell, who everywhere I go, people ask me in Indian country, oh, did you know Gail Prijin, Kawaipuna, or did you know Dr. Kekuni Blaisdell? And Kekuni was a mentor to me and Camille. But basically, during that time, the 70s, there's organizing, there's struggle. Coming out of the 60s, civil rights movement, and then, of course, the revolutionary ideas with the Black Panthers, with American Indian movement, Chicano Revolutionary Party, Hawaii starting to get traction and starting to organize towards justice. And the 70s is a very formative period for us. The Protect Kaho'olawi Ohana emerges out of a group called Hui Alaloa, which was struggling on Molokai for access to land, which ironically, Molokai right now is full circle in that same struggle for access to that same piece of land. But you know, the 70s become a catalyst, and that's our parents' generation. And consciousness, political consciousness arises, and we start to unpack our political history, which largely many Hawaiians had forgotten about, were just unaware of, you know, due to struggle in this American capitalist structure that was imposed on us.
Mm-hmm. And some of our key leaders, like Walter Riddy, were part of that.
Everybody knows him, Uncle Walter.
Uncle Walter,
Uncle
yeah,
Walter.
still going. Still going.
And what's important is those same elders have been part of our recent movements. And what they're saying is, we're tired of doing this. We don't want you folks to have to do this, because we've been fighting this all our lives, the same things. But they've been important mentors to us. Uncle Walter was a co-founder of HULI, Hawaii Unity and Liberation Institute, and has really been a key partner in a lot of our struggles.
Yeah, so this this history, this movement history, and just to bring it into to these relationships that we have sitting here. I remember sitting in a yurt. I think it was 20 or 30 below. I lost count about how below zero it was in 2016. You know, in the movement in Standing Rock. And I remember something that you, André, shared with me and continued to share with me as we created NDN Collective, and as we continued to resource and to build the movement. You said, make sure you don't forget about the Hawaiians. Make sure that we reestablish some of those historical alliances between the movement in Hawaii and the Indigenous peoples movement on the mainland. And that stuck with me. So since the very beginning of NDN Collective, we made sure that the Hawaiian people and their movement and your people were not an afterthought. And it has increased our understanding. It's helped us sharpen our political spear. It's helped us understand the cultural differences. It's helped us advance our strategies. It's helped us learn from one another. And I think now you see some of that playing out in the LANDBACK movement. You know, to go to Hawaii, and then be able to see how much the Hawaiians are down for LANDBACK is pretty powerful. And so if there's anything, you know, why do you think that is? Why does LANDBACK mean something so powerful to both of you? And we'll start with Camille. And why do you think it's embraced so much by the people of Hawaii?
Because it's the key to all of our liberation. I mean, and it's not about getting land, it's land back, and that says a lot for our people, that we still have these unrelinquished claims. These lands are still occupied, and so we share that history of lands being stolen. And so for our people, it's very easy to relate to, because that is really the foundation of our political struggle and our social struggles and everything that is that we are battling today. So that's what I think.
Yeah, and I mean, to quote, one of our elders, Antipua Kanahele, a highly esteemed cultural elder, she says, we are the land, and the land is us. We come from the land. And so in the cultural, spiritual context, the land, our relationship with the land is not in the context of like European or Western thought, where the land is for our benefit. We understand that the land, we're in relationship with the land, and the land makes up our very identity of who we are as Hawaiians. Our ancestral tie, we come from the land through our understanding of our cosmogony, and through our understanding of the taro plant, Haloa Nakalau Kapalili, the name of the first taro, that our cosmogony, our creation stories tell us that we come from the food of the land. We are the land. So our identity, our culture, our social makeup is informed and tied and held together really by the land. And so LANDBACK is also important to understand, not just in the context of a commodity, but it's in context of relationship, to the land. And, we have a wise saying in Hawaiian language, He ali'i ka aina, he kawa ke kanaka. And it's our way, it shapes our relationship. And that means that the land is the chief, and humans, we're just servants to the land. So we care for the land, we cultivate the land, and we exist in symbiotic relationship in a way that's sustainable. We are the land.
And so land back really means land back in our care, that kuleana, that responsibility,
stewardship,
to care for it, because it's been and continues to be so abused.
That's the thing, like, as we continue to build a LANDBACK movement and explain to folks what this is, as Indigenous people, when we say LANDBACK, I remember I would go around for a while and I would be like, what do you think about LANDBACK? What does LANDBACK mean to you? And people would stop for a minute and be like, hell yeah. Fuck yeah, LANDBACK.
Everything. It means everything.
It means everything. It's everything that was taken, everything that was stolen. And so it is a reclamation. And that's why more and more I'm like, it's actually a liberation framework. Mm-hmm. It's an organizing framework to lean in towards Indigenous liberation. And I think that a lot of times the colonizers and the powers that be try to discredit our narratives. They try to minimize our narratives, especially revolutionary ones, like LANDBACK. Oh, they're just being radical. They're just out there being radical. Yet we're talking about the reestablishment of biodiversity. We're talking about the reestablishment of traditional food systems that are better for the ecology, for Mother Earth, that are better for the health of the people, that are better for the economy, that are better for culture. And I think that, when we think and talk about LANDBACK as Indigenous people, many of the folks that have benefited from the stealing of our land, what I've noticed is that they get scared. Mm-hmm. Their fragility.
Get uncomfortable.
They get uncomfortable.
Right.
What do you say to that? As somebody in your communities that are organizing, that are fighting for liberation, that are doing the work of rebuilding your people and your nation, like, what do you say, and what would you say to folks that feel scared of LANDBACK, that feel all of a sudden, they feel a little bit fragile, a little bit worried? What would you say to them, Camille?
This is something I say, whether it's for LANDBACK or for when we're fighting for Native Hawaiian rights and protections of burials, protections of water resources, that this is, whether you know it or not, this is for your benefit too. That what we do with these lands, and when we have them back, it benefits all peoples on the planet. And now more than ever, we need that kind of change in order to save the earth. So don't be scared of your house. We're not coming for your house today. What we're coming for is these food systems, to reestablish them so that we can support ourselves. We're coming for, 1.2 million acres of government land that still have military bases that are still bomb training and poisoning these lands. Some of these places that our water is still being poisoned, and this myth that theft and that dispossession is over and happened. It continues on a daily basis, So we're really trying to stop that train and say, do you really need 700 acres for your personal house when there's homeless Hawaiians right down the street?
I think, too, what's important and powerful about LANDBACK as a slogan and a concept and an organizing framework is that in the simplicity of it is the power. I have never met an Indigenous person who doesn't want their ancestral land back. Have you?
I have not.
I have never met an Indigenous person who doesn't want their land back.
I think that's the thing. Like, that's the thing I always liked, and it's intergenerational.
Right.
I remember talking to elders early on when we first started making LANDBACK art, when LANDBACK art first started kind of coming out from the front lines. And that's just a reminder to the folks listening out there too. LANDBACK didn't come from, it didn't come from some marketing firm. It didn't come from some think tank somewhere. It didn't come from somebody who was focusing on trying to create new narratives. It really came from the front line. It came from the front line of many of us throughout the Indigenous world that were organizing on the front line, that were fighting the corporations, that were fighting the colonial governments, that was allowing the corporations to pollute our lands. And it was something as simple as, if we had our land back, we wouldn't have to be exhausting ourselves with all of this. We would have the ability to give or not give consent over our lands and our people and how it impacts them. So it really comes from such a simplistic place, but it is a powerful, that's why I even say I often say it's a war cry for the liberation of Indigenous people and our land, because it hits every part of what we're talking about today, So I'm curious to what's next for LANDBACK in Hawaii. You got the biggest concentration of billionaires in the world there. You have a huge amount of opportunity for, it's one of the rainiest places on the earth. It plays an important role into the biodiversity of that entire part of the world. And what do you see is next for the LANDBACK movement in Hawaii?
I mean, what I see is, we continue to struggle, because as Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael said, consciousness will only come through struggle. So we're going to continue to struggle and resist and fight for our land back. But we have plans to roll out some land back campaign work towards that consciousness raising in different ways. One, we're going to help Uncle Walter Riddy and the Molokai community struggle for that land back on the west side, Kaluakoi of Molokai. So one, helping communities. That's what we exist for. HULI, we're a nonviolent direct action training and support org for our community to empower and uplift our community, in struggle. So, we want to kokua, we want to help the Molokai community for their struggle against almost 1/3 of their island, which is owned by a foreign corporation out of Singapore. We want to raise consciousness around LANDBACK and really decentralize it so that LANDBACK movements, campaigns, consciousness starts to take on a life of its own in different communities. So we're strategizing to bring resources to our community and empower our community to take on their own land back struggle. and together collectively, when we're all working together, whether it's Lahaina Maui, whether it's Keaukaha on the Big Island, or whether it's Wailua on Kauai, or, different places that, when we're a multitude of voices, as we say in Hawaiian, laulima, many hands working together. Yeah. That's our power. That's our internal power. But then as we reach our hands across, to Turtle Island, to people like NDN Collective and your community and others, through solidarity, we strengthen our struggle. And so LANDBACK is about, for us, maintaining the connections of solidarity and external, internal support going back and forth in this synergistic effect to struggle against American global capitalism and land dispossession, as Camille said, which is still happening to this day in Hawaii through processes like adverse possession and different legal frameworks that dispossess Hawaiians of land.
That's the reference you were making about being priced out of paradise. I mean, that caught me when you were saying that. So Camille, to the next generation, LANDBACK has brought together a whole new generation of younger organizers now collaborating and working with older organizers, all in the same effort. What would be your message to some of these young organizers who are coming up fighting in the LANDBACK movement?
I think one of our key messages, just coming out of almost 20 years of struggling activism together against all the issues is it's important to ku'e. That's our resistance. That's when we stand up and fight. But it's just as, and maybe more so, important to kukulu, to build. Create. And that's what I see, NDN doing, is really building infrastructure for our people so that we can be liberated. And but we cannot also be afraid to ku'e, that as we build, there are going to be times when we need to step out in front of the bulldozers, There are going to be times when we have no other choice because we've exhausted all other remedies and we have to stand on that front line. But what are we doing in between? We have a lot of work to do, I would say, as young people. We have a lot of roles to fill and, a lot of building towards self-governance. We have quite a bit of work to rebuild what was lost. And so join us in that building just as much as that resistance.
I appreciate those words. I mean, it's one of the philosophies we've always had here at NDN Collective. When we say defend, develop, decolonize, what we're talking about is defending air, land, water rights and community. Mm-hmm. While at the same time developing regenerative and inclusive economies based in Indigenous values, based in Indigenous thinking, Indigenous analysis, worldviews, yep. Decolonizing or indigenizing, our systems that have been taken from us. And it's not either or. That's what I love about the work that both of you do too. It's not separate. And a lot of times they try to, as the powers that be, or white supremacy, or imperialism and colonialism, try to say, the activist and those, creating jobs and building systems, those are separate people.
Right.
When the reality is we are the same people. And that's what I love about the work that you all do there too. Everything from what you're doing on the farm that you're doing in what you're doing on the front lines, there's no separation. It's a way of life approach.
I mean, that's a good analysis because sometimes even the colonized minds of our own people see it that way. Those activists are fighting and we're over here doing economic development. And yeah, they're not separate. We need to have agency and self-determination, and that includes our lands, our resources, and our economic development and creating food systems and things like that. And so, as Camille said, our philosophy that we operate by is ku'e kukulu. Ku'e to resist, kukulu to build and create. And in my mind, for many years, I was the ku'e guy. I was on the front line, on the sidewalk, holding signs at every meeting, every obscure sovereignty meeting. And I wasn't building power that way. I was exhausting myself and kind of spinning my wheels. And so Camille and I made a conscious decision really when we got stewardship of our farm, that we're going to start operating by this principle, and basically maybe ku'e 20% of the time when necessary. The bulldozers are coming, we'll get in front of those bulldozers. Or kukulu, though, is majority of our time where we're creating systems and structures that uplift and empower our people, whether it be through HULI, where we bring nonviolent direct action training to Hawaii, or organizing, and that's the key, organizing to Hawaii, training for our people. And the message, a part of the message for your question to the next generation, the young people, is learn how to organize. Organize to build power for our people. It's critical. And don't be afraid, and don't ever give up.
And some don't know where to start or don't know how to plug in, and it's really start where you're at. So a lot of the most powerful movements came from the people of that place, struggling to protect what they've built and put their time and energy into. And so there's lots of things you can get involved in right in your own community, and that's a great place to start.
I always tell young people, in a nutshell, you want to get involved, find something that you're passionate about and move towards it, whether it's cultural practices, whether it's environmental land, malama Āina, caring for the land, or whether it's community organizing. Find an issue that you're passionate about and move towards it and help. Kokua, get involved.
Yeah, you heard it right here on the Land Back for the People podcast. You can't wait for somebody else to one day get your land back. You can't wait for somebody else to one day arrive. You have to organize. You have to take those risks. You have to not be afraid of what's coming. You have to lean into those things. How do folks support HULI? How can folks support your work that you're doing out there? In what are ways that people can contribute, get involved, and support not only your organization but also the movement in Hawaii?
Well, a good way is if you follow us on Instagram, or mainly Instagram. We have a solid network of other organizations that we work together with, whether it's Kanaiokana, Ka'ohewai, some of these other Hawaii orgs. You'll see us all joining together on a lot of our issues. So when you hear a call, if you can show up. If you can't, spread the message of what's going on. You can donate to a lot of these causes and to HULI.
Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram, huli.nvda, or HULI on Facebook. But really, Camille and I, we work hard to bring resources to our people. And I think, the message to the Hawaiian community is show up for these things, whether it's the front line on Mauna Kea or Kalua Ko'i Molokai, or whether it's Red Hill on Oahu. Show up and get involved. There's many ways to get, show up with drinking water or help wash dishes. And people grow into the movement, you grow and you assume or are given kuleana responsibilities. But yeah, our goal is to bring these opportunities to Hawaiian community, and we want our people to show up and participate, and in the learning and in the resistance.
That's the greatest call to action. I mean, I think that I was somebody as a child that my parents brought to the front lines, that my parents brought to these meetings, that my parents brought to these spaces. And so over time, my analysis grew around that. And so I love that call to action, because I think that when people show up, there's always a role. You can show up, you can stoke the fire, you can cut the wood, you can take the trash out, you can help that elder, you can take some food to somebody. And through that process, you're already part of the movement. You're already there.
2 feet in.
2 feet in. And that's the thing I love about the movement and the movement spaces is sometimes folks feel like they're on the outside looking in. How do I get involved, right? What is my call to action? What is my spirit calling me to do? And 99% of it is just showing up. It's just showing up and throwing down. And we see that in our movements here. We see that in what you all are doing in Hawaii. And I want to end by saying that this relationship was built through resistance.
That's right.
These, for the folks that are listening, these Hawaiians came all the way from paradise to the frozen tundra in Standing Rock, and they stood with us, and you sacrificed with us, and never would we ever take that lightly. And so for me, that we built relationships from that place, that work will continue on. That commitment to your people and to your movement from here will absolutely continue on. And I mean that in the most sincere way. And I'm excited for what the future holds between our people and our movements and the potential that exists when we build collective power.
Absolutely. I mean, we went to Standing Rock just out of an intrinsic urge and desire to help Lakota people who we saw were struggling. Dogs were being set on them, and heavy-handed militarized police. And of course, there was risk and there was a little bit of discomfort. Like, what are we walking into? Far away from home. But we had courage because we knew we were doing the right thing, and we went there. We went to Standing Rock to help any way that we could, to build relationships and to contribute, with nonviolent direct action training and support, and just out of a sense of human, love and solidarity for people who look like us, who are struggling. And that's all it was. It wasn't complex or difficult. Just our heart led us to Standing Rock to help. And we met each other, and we struggled, together. And it was all underpinned by love and solidarity for justice for our people. And we're still on that path. It really never ended.
Yeah.
And I think for our people, we encourage others to also come up and stand in solidarity, because it's a shared struggle for our sacred sites, for our places, our ancestral homelands, for clean water, the basics. We all share that in common. And so it's not, our struggle or your struggle, it's our struggle. And the more that we bond together and we come together, the easier it gets. Because when it came time to our struggle, we had support, we had relationships that we could depend on. And we knew that because we stood in struggle together. And so, we don't want to stay home and, just focus on ourselves, because there's so much more out there, not only to struggle for, but also to learn from, to build from, and to grow from.
And, your philosophy, Nick, that you shared with me years ago, the culture of abundance versus the culture of scarcity, where, as Indigenous people, we're struggling for resources. But if we embrace that uplifting and sharing and caring, that really is a very Hawaiian thing. We come from a culture of aloha. And when we went to Standing Rock, we went there with aloha. We didn't expect anything in return. And here we are now, having forged these relationships, this bond through struggle. And I want to acknowledge and say mahalo to NDN Collective for the work that you've done in Hawaii in such a short time, through the fellowships, Changemaker and Radical Imagination, through grant making, through investment and sharing resources in this concept of culture of abundance. And I always say this, and I'll say it again, when we occupied Mauna Kea, NDN Collective really was the very first organization within the first week of the occupation to respond with resources and support, because you were able to pivot quickly because you're in control of your own resources. Other Hawaiian orgs, did kick in, later, but they weren't able to move as quick. And for me, that was a learning lesson about building our own power, building our own resources, so that we have agency and self-determination to decide how to support, how to apply that. But we're always grateful for NDN's support in Hawaii. And yes, I remember saying that don't forget about Hawaii, and you've shown us that you haven't. So mahalo.
Well, it's been an honor, because I think our work here is exactly that. It's liberating, it's liberating resources and putting the power of back into the hands of the people, and trusting that when the resources are in the hands of the people, in the hands of the movement, that we will win. We will achieve liberation. We will change the world, and we'll build a path forward. So NDN's committed to continuing to invest into the self-determination of the people of Hawaii and to continue to rebuild our relationships between our movements, maintain and strengthen our relationships between our movements and our struggles. So I appreciate both of you for coming on here onto the LANDBACK for the people, and I look forward to getting continued updates. And I'm guessing I'll probably see you on Hawaii this year.
Guaranteed.
All right. Sounds
Mahalo.
good. All right.
Right on. LANDBACK.
LANDBACK. All right.
Hey.
Madakuyasin.
Oh, man. That sweat. That was spiritual for me, bro. I'm for real. Like,
Wait, you went, I seen you move like you were gonna be getting out, and then